is an interagency community of practice on engaging displaced communities and host communities and local authorities in displacement responses. And one of the ways that we share resources and experiences, challenges, solutions, in addition to on our website and our online platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram, is also these community coffee and chat sessions. So these are informal web sessions where we discuss different community engagement topics based on requests from forum members and advisory board members. And this time we have asked our colleagues from IRC to join us because they have this, they've developed a toolkit on, it's good, let me get it correct, E2E. What is it? Enabling to empower. Correct.
Empower to enable.
Empower to enable.
Split it. But cool.
Perfect. It could work the other way as well, actually. But it's all about supporting your frontline staff, so your field staff, the people that are actually meeting your clients in humanitarian responses, empowering them to facilitate participation and community engagement. So you have looked into 6 specific barriers of why frontline staff are currently not as empowered as they should be. And then you will suggest some tools from this toolkit that can be used to help in this process. So I'm going to hand over to you, Leah, and Dastan. You're very welcome to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us to present here. We're excited about this format because as we do a lot of presentations of this toolkit, they're all very PowerPoint heavy. And so I personally always am trying to create these spaces for discussion. So I'm happy to have this largely discussion-based format. So thanks for inviting us, Kristen. Yeah, just to repeat again, I'm Leah Brown. I am the Client Responsiveness Project Manager. So I manage this project at the IRC. And I'll be presenting together with my colleague Dastan, who is the meal coordinator for IRC Iraq, who was also very involved in the implementation of this project. And he'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Yeah, so a little bit of background about the Empower to Enable toolkit. I just shared a link in the chat, so if you want to open that up and explore it while I'm speaking, that would help. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about it since we only have a few minutes, so it would help to supplement the information I share. So the Empower to Enable toolkit, as Kristen was saying, is a set of 7 practical tools, which we designed with the goal of helping humanitarian organizations better empower their frontline staff so that their frontline staff can better enable the participation of affected people in humanitarian decision-making. I also just want to note before we move on, at the IRC, probably many of you know this already, but in case you don't, at the IRC, we have chosen to use clients instead of beneficiaries or affected people. And client responsiveness is our, accountability to those people. So if I'm trying to not use those to be not so IRC specific, but if I do use clients or client responsiveness, I just want to make sure everyone can follow that.
Thanks, that's great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so this project really began with this question of what's holding organizations back from truly meaningful participation of affected people. We saw that, most humanitarian organizations, including the IRC, we have collecting feedback figured out. We know how to do that. That's pretty straightforward. But we haven't really advanced yet much beyond that. We haven't really fully figured out how to truly engage communities in decision-making beyond just collecting their feedback. At the IRC, we started to think that this could be due to a need for more power sharing and more horizontal decision making. And we thought an easy way to start with that would be with our frontline staff. Frontline staff are already a part of our organizations, so they're very accessible to us. We're already hearing their voices and opinions to some degree. But they're also our bridge between our organizations and the communities we work with. Many of our frontline staff come from the communities we're working with. They often speak these local languages that, you know, people at the global level or at the leadership level don't speak. And they're often in these communities every single day or interacting with them every single day. So they really possess this invaluable contextual knowledge and also a strong understanding of community needs and preferences. And they're responsible for our community engagement activities, like leading focus group discussions and operating phone lines. Yet their role in this is kind of often ignored. Humanitarian organizations haven't really fully embraced this important role that humanitarian staff play in enabling participation of affected people. So that's where this project started from. So we started with trying to understand why this is happening, why we're not fully embracing this role yet. So we did this massive research to understand what the current role of frontline staff is and why we're not fully embracing them. And that culminated in this E2E learning report, which has kind of formed the basis of the toolkit that we're going to talk about today. So here is the learning report. So one of the main findings of the learning report was that we identified 6 specific barriers that are preventing humanitarian organizations from fully embracing the critical role of frontline staff in enabling participation. I'm just going to run through them kind of quickly. But it's important to, I think, share these barriers because this is what the toolkit actually fully is based on. So the 6 barriers are that participation is not widely understood, meaning that a lot of people in the sector have very different understandings of what participation is, how to do it, why we're doing it, and the depth to which, you know, a lot of people think feedback mechanisms are just, that's all there is to participation, when there's really a lot more that needs to be done. The second is limited leadership prioritization. So at the top level, often we see participation being kind of like a box ticking exercise, you know, maybe it's included on a grant application and people are just checking it off. And when it's not really being prioritized, you know, leaders set the culture. So that means everyone under them is not going to prioritize this and not going to allot a lot of time for it and a lot of resources for it. Which leads us to our third barrier, which is a lack of resources available for participatory activities, which I think is self-explanatory. Frontline staff told us that they find it hard to get vehicles when they need to do site visits, or sometimes translators are needed when there's a local language that no one speaks at the organization. And it's hard to get these resources. Fourth, we have exclusion of frontline staff from decision-making, which is also pretty self-explanatory. Decisions at our organizations are typically very top-down. A lot of times, technical expertise is valued way more than this contextual knowledge that frontline staff possess, which results in them not being in the room when decisions are made. Fifth, we have that frontline staff have a lot of priorities, a lot to do, and very limited time. We found that frontline staff are not being allocated time for a lot of these participatory activities, which are fundamental to engaging with communities. And then last, we have that frontline staff don't really have much ability to act on client feedback. So they're collecting all this feedback. People are constantly telling them what they think of our programming. but they can't really do anything about all this feedback that they're collecting. They can share it with their supervisors, but they told us that rarely are they seeing changes made based on it, which results not only in frontline staff being frustrated, but the community is frustrated with them because they're sharing these ideas and then they don't see much progress happening. So those are the 6 barriers that we identified. The way we formed this toolkit is that we actually had in-person workshops in Iraq and also in the DRC. We wanted 2 kind of different contexts. And we asked them, what tools do you need to address these barriers in your work? And so that's what forms the basis of the E2E Toolkit. It also explains why, if you open the toolkit, it's formatted as a map. So you start with the barriers, and that leads you to the tool that you will need to address that barrier specifically. We thought it's very easy for people to identify their challenges. It's not always easy to identify the changes that need to be made. And so we wanted to make this kind of a user-friendly format. Just looking at our time, I think we're okay to keep. I'll just explain the 7 tools very high level. And then after that, I'm going to pass off to Dastan to tell you about his experience actually using. He won't tell you about his experience using all the 7 tools because then we'd be here for a very long time. But I think he'll just explain 2 or 3 of the tools and their experience using them. So the 7 tools are, first, engaging frontline staff in proposal design, which is a guide that does exactly what's implied by the title. It guides organizations on how they can include frontline staff in proposal design processes, since they possess this critical contextual knowledge and knowledge of community preferences. Second, we have the Senior Management Team Field Visit Form, which is a long title, but it's just a document that guides leaders on how they can engage directly with frontline staff during a field visit. Third is a focus group discussion guide. So this is just an updated guide for frontline staff to use when they conduct focus groups to help them conduct more meaningful focus groups that gather community input on programming. Fourth, we have the AAP Resources Library, which is just, we noticed that there's a need for this comprehensive list of resources that are available in the sector on different AAP topics. Yeah, that one's pretty simple. Fifth, we have the leadership self-assessment, which is more or less a checklist for leaders, we say at the country program level, but it can be at other levels, to assess how well they're supporting community participation at the frontline level. Sixth, we have, this is also a very long title, Community Engagement Responsibilities and Self-Assessment for Frontline Staff. So it's a 2-part tool. First is aimed at frontline staff job descriptions, and the second is aimed at frontline staff annual assessments. So the first part of it is just some language that can be added to generally any frontline staff job description to ensure that they actually have community engagement responsibilities listed on their job description, with the goal of ensuring that there's more time allocated in their job to performing these duties. And then the second part is a self-assessment for frontline staff that they can use to gauge their strength and certain skills that are critical to community engagement, and also if they have what they need to perform these community engagement duties. And then last but not least, we have the budget template, which is just a form that can show you what resources you need to use the tools of this toolkit. And for some of the tools, you don't need any. So that's kind of the point of that. And then additionally, we have kind of a complementary thing, which is an online training, an online client responsiveness or AAP training, which came because during the pilot, a lot of frontline staff and other staff pointed out that they need a little bit more training on understanding what client responsiveness or community engagement or AAP is, why we do it and how to do it. And so that is linked also to the toolkit. And I can also share a link to that.
Yes,
great. Oh, sorry, please go ahead if you have a question or comment.
No, I said yes, please.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So once we created this toolkit to ensure that the tools were effective, we piloted it. So we tested it in Iraq and the DRC with both IRC staff and local partners. And so I want to hand off to Dastan, who was an integral part of that pilot, to explain a little bit about Iraq's experience using the tools and what they learned from using them. So Dastan, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Leah. Thank you so much for inviting me for this interesting chat. I just want to say mostly the things that Leah mentioned is very valid when it comes to the country level or the intervention level, because usually we do let's say at the senior level or in the main offices we update the context. We always talk about the participation, the community, but actually most of the time it's a very high priority during the proposal design, during the when we want to submit the proposals, and later because of the very busy implementation operation. So there's so many things people will forget it, and maybe at the end of the project we will remember by the evaluations or just providing some let's say data or information about that. The E2E was very interesting. Last year when I joined the IRC, the project has started, so I wasn't there from the beginning, but actually when I understood about the approach and the things, I really loved it and made a priority for our mill department to make sure that the tools that we have, we will pilot it and we will see the result, or actually just see how it will be affecting or changing the way we do the program. Maybe I will briefly will talk about some of the tools that we have used, implemented, and how that was let's say welcomed, or how the frontline staff saw that, or even at the main office level. One of the tool that we have implemented first, it was the senior management assessment. So that tool actually was very interesting. So at that tool, you don't have any frontline staff at the discussion, but it's on the senior management level. And the interesting part is especially for when I saw it was for our operational team, like finance, HR, logistics, because usually they are the teams that they think they have just to provide the needs that you have, but actually when you go into the detail of the discussion about what actually the frontline staff need, what we need to actually get the community's feedback through the frontline staff. So there was so many interesting discussion, because again it seems like it's the first time for them to think about that area of their work as well, because usually they just see it as an operation, it's something the program is dealing with it. So it's a very interesting when it's opened a lot of discussion on the senior management level team operation program. Another tool is the SMT, or the senior management team field visit, because usually the senior management, maybe they are very busy and they are not spending that much time in the field. And when they go to the field, usually they just visit one or two center or locations or implementation, and they ask generally with the I don't know, head of the center, or maybe the officer or someone. Maybe in some rare cases they will have a small chat with the frontline staff, and maybe it's also about the program. But if you go into the detail of that tool, it requires, or it preferred that the senior management team staff to sit in person, one-on-one with the frontline staff. And if you go through the questions, all the questions is about the community's feedback. So it's not about like how is our project is going, how's the budget, how's the like that kind of the implementation side, but like it's actually all about the community's feedback, community's opinion, community's engagement with us, like how's the context. So all the questions is about the community's engagement through the frontline staff response. And it's a very important because like usually I think as Leah mentioned, like all of that responses most of the time came from the other positions, which is like maybe it's a second-handed, so it's not directly from the frontline staff, but it's a very important that the frontline staff have that engagement with the senior management team. And also there's something there which is like it's like empower the frontline staff, like they actually value that communication because they will be ensured that their voices is heard. It's not just like it's just some visit, they come and have like a small chat with them. So like that's very, very appreciated. But again, like that tool is very effective, but I think it's also just to not forget like about the practicality is like someone needs to be reminding the SMT to do that, which is like for us, it's like usually the meal, we take that responsibility. Another tool which was like that one was very, very interesting is the engaging the community, the frontline staff during the proposal writing. And actually we have done that in the Iraq, and the tool has some explanation on how to engage the frontline staff during the proposal writing. And also it takes consideration about the resource limitation and all the other challenges. So you have three approaches, like the directly or getting the feedback from frontline staff, and then the supervisor or like the program manager to share that. In Iraq, I think for one of our biggest proposal or the project, we engaged the frontline staff in the design phase. So it was the first time for the frontline staff to be in that kind of meetings, because usually you just have the head of the program, the business development, they tried to always to write and do the proposal, but it was the first time for the frontline staff to participate there. So it was interesting for the both side, for the team that usually do that work, to see the new members in the committee or like in the room, and also for the frontline staff for the first time to see how that process is going. And that one also it was very appreciated by the frontline staff, because like directly they shared their experience, their let's say recommendation, suggestion, like the correction or anything about the project that they have implemented in the last 2 years, because that project we have been implementing it previously. So based on their experiences, actually, they engaged with the especially business development team, and also business development team. They got a lot of benefit from that, because it's something that you directly can change an activity or approach, or like how you do something confidently, because like you know that it's coming from the experience and it's coming from the people who are actually doing that job. So like you don't have any doubt of changing or modifying it or like altering anything of the way of the activities or like approaches. So that tool also like was very, very interesting. And unfortunately, the only challenging with that tool is that I think maybe most of the organization will have the same challenges, that a proposal period, when you develop a proposal, the period is very, very, very limited. Like it's a very short period. So sometimes you don't have the all luxury to invite them, to have all of them in the room to do that like lengthy discussion. Again, because of that, like the tool is suggesting like a different approaches. So maybe like when we know there is a proposal, you can actually collect the feedback from the frontline staff and then summarize it, have it during the proposal. So that challenge is very unfortunate for that tool. Another tool, which is the job description for the frontline staff, to not forget that. That tool seems like maybe very easy to add the three task or three points to the job description of the frontline staff, but you really don't imagine how many times I have reminded the head of programs, our sectors, the HRs, to add that. So for me, like actually I was monitoring any new position that we advertise in the Iraq IRC and has the frontline responsibilities, to remind the HR, to remind the program to add that. Again, because like people actually forget things, and when the organization, they have like a big operation, so not everyone remember what has been done, what should be done. But I find it very useful, because like then it became a practice for me as a meal and the programs after many times to not forget it. And in that way, actually, it was interesting that the automatically for the recruiter, for the programs to remember the frontline staff responsibility, E2E responsibility for job descriptions. After sometimes I start notice that without telling them that the job description was updated with that 3 responsibilities, and it was a really success. I see it like for having that tool. I don't want to take much longer time, so that was actually our experience. And something else which I really appreciated, it was parallel to as a IRC Iraq implementing that, as Leah mentioned, we had 2 other Iraqi local NGO were piloting the same tool, and we have them during the journey of this pilot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so
you,
much.
Dastan.
Yeah, and that really concludes our presentation. So now we're just here to answer any questions or discuss any discussion topics that anyone might have. I am also going to share one more link. I know I've shared a lot of links, but we wrote a case study based on the experiences of everyone who was involved in piloting the tools, which contains a lot more details about what Dastan just shared, but also the experiences from local partners and from the DRC as well.
I think that's great, Leah. Please share. It's always good to have examples of how others have used and contextualized the tools. Thanks both of you. It's really very practical tools, very practical ways to address these barriers. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but there might be questions that people are waiting to ask. Just raise your hand or turn on your camera. Turn off your mic and ask a question if you have any. If not, maybe I can start with one. I'll start with a difficult one. So in this process of empowering the frontline staff, have you had to deal with any problems related to risk transfer? We've been discussing a lot in this forum previously about the risks related to some participatory processes. When we're talking about the local staff, like the onus being on the local staff to having to, for example, come back to a community with bad news about not receiving the amount of funding that they were looking for, etc. Yeah, is this something that you've been discussing in the empowerment process of the frontline staff?
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask this, because actually I just wrote a blog post on this topic, but a little bit more extensive on frontline experience for interaction, and they asked me to address the same question. To be honest, unfortunately, I think it hasn't been a huge part of our research and development of this toolkit. I feel like it's like a very current topic right now. That unfortunately I think wasn't as much in the conversation when we started. However, I'll say, like, I think it did influence the development of the toolkit. For example, in Iraq, it was really difficult to use, this isn't necessarily frontline staff, but it was difficult to use the field visit form because it was hard to get permissions for leadership to visit certain areas. However, we already have local partners in those areas. And so in that case, the risk transfers to local partners. I think, though, also this is like the benefit of frontline staff and local partners, is that I think they face less of a challenge in these contexts because typically they're from the community or more deeply ingrained in the community. So whereas someone like me coming to a community as a total outsider and announcing, we didn't take into account your feedback on this programming, or even like you won't be included in this new grant, but this other community will be. I think if it's coming from me, that'll be received a lot worse than if it's coming from someone from that community, or an organization that is also from that community. So I think that's part of like the benefit of engaging frontline staff and local partners better in, or relying on them more in this community engagement process. Dastan, I don't know if you have anything to add as well. I think you probably have more direct experience with this.
Actually, I think you covered it well, but also I think the way some of the tools is working, or like the intention of the tools doesn't have that much of like the risk for the frontline staff, because usually it's like to get the information that already the frontline staff they have it, either from as engaging them in the proposal, or like for them having a discussion with the SMTs, or like the self-assessment. So basically, I don't know, like the tools that we have implemented, because we haven't implemented all the tools in Iraq, but usually the tools that we have, it's already working on or like it's depend on the information that's already is there. But that point was very true, that the access is very, very something which is, it's a very difficult or the challenge for the not just the SMT actually, because you have some area in Iraq which is like even the local staff cannot access it very easily, either because of the security, either because like the political change or the context. So that one also is valid even for the local staff, not the only senior management team.
Mm. Thanks very much for answering, both of you. Do anyone else have any questions? I don't see any hands. Yaksan, yes.
Yes.
I was expecting this.
Thank you for the tools. Actually, really interesting tools. Very well needed. Thank you guys for the hard work. I know it's not easy. Quick question. You choose the word client, and I'm really supportive of the word client. But do we have any the word client come from business, right? Like, okay, do we have any expert in business relation client? Yeah, I work in business. I do humanitarian. I work in business. Can we use people coming from business? Because my own belief, one of our problems is we're still inside of our bubble. So if we're using the word client, it would be a good idea to have somebody from outside coming from business for the feedback. Second question I have is, did you introduce the tool to the donor community or not yet? And if you did, how did they respond to it? Thank you.
I'm very sorry. I had to adjust my volume settings while you were speaking, so I don't know if I heard your questions 100%. Would you mind repeating them?
No problem at all. Sorry, I left my headset at home. I have two questions. Did you present your tool to the donor community, and did they respond to it? Were they for the tools? Were they really happy to see it? Second things, you use the word client, and that's business term. I'm totally support the word client, because I mentioned one time, if we're supporting clients, we will be all out of business. So basically we'll be fired. Nobody can look. So did you have any business experts on feedback to customers and client relation? Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I'll start with the first one, which is about donors. Yeah, so after we developed the toolkit, we've had these series of like what we call dialogue events to kind of present it, but also like open up just this topic of engaging frontline staff more in participation. And we tried our best to include donors in that. So our donor who supported this project was BHA. So they sent their representatives at the very least. And then we also had a few participants, I believe, from like UN agencies that can also be funders. Yeah, I think this was honestly a thing that kind of has been a question throughout the life of this project, is how much can we address donors in this? Because I think there's like this unspoken line, this unspoken idea between all of us that we know that being able to do any sort of work in participation, accountability, strengthening frontline staff kind of requires a donor support. So yeah, this question has really been constant throughout the project. I think we decided that the easiest entry path to affecting change, in terms of empowering frontline staff, is through humanitarian organizations, like, implementing organizations, as the IRC specifically, like this is where we have influence. And so our toolkit is really aimed, the toolkit is meant to be used by them. However, we did want to include donors in the conversation and have them start thinking about this topic area. I think it was your question was it well received? I know I went like way beyond that. I do think it was well received. Specifically, we had one of these dialogue events in DC, and we had several people from BHA and USAID, as well as like the US State Department PRM there. And they were very interested in the topic, I'll say that, and opened up the discussion around how they can better support us as we try to make this shift. And also like how they can better, localization is a really big topic, especially I think for US government donors right now, something that's kind of been challenged recently. And so I think this influenced them to think about localization in a different context rather than transferring to local partners, also like also better empowering frontline staff. So I hope that answers that first question. Let me know if there's any follow-up questions to it. To your second question, no, we really haven't engaged many business experts in this project. This has really been like a very humanitarian community specific project. In terms of the development, yeah, please go ahead.
Actually, I think his question about like why as a IRC we use the terms of as a client, not the beneficiary. I think like for the whole, maybe our organization, not just the E2E.
I see.
No, I support the word client. I support the word client,
yeah,
because I'm pro having client, but how we have more expertise, because business, they've been like, they did it already. So instead of we inventing the wheels, we can borrow their expertise and use it in our field. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think this is a valid point. Yeah, we haven't really engaged anyone from a business perspective in this project. Yeah, I wasn't around when the IRC developed this term, so I can't really tell you in detail how it was developed. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues from the client responsiveness department at IRC are here, because they probably would have more to say on this topic. Or Dastan, if you have anything to add on it.
Actually, I think I have a paragraph which is from our files as a IRC, explaining why we are using the client instead of beneficiary. So I'll just copy paste it in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also I mean I think client is a very good word to use, a good term to use for accountability purposes. And I know what Yaksan means, because we've had several discussions around if we really saw our project participants as clients, if we were really, leading our programs as a business model, we would all be out of work, because our clients would not be well pleased with how we are delivering our programs. So it really is a very accountability directed terminology. So yeah. Ruxandra.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation and the work done. This is Ruxandra from the Global CCM cluster. I wonder several things. First, to what degree did you have included in your project, or you have further plans as IRC to disseminate the report findings and the tools? And how do you see that going? As in, how extensive would that be? And then I also wonder, I skimmed through the report fairly quickly and saw that there were some consultations there also referenced. But I wonder maybe even further than that, to what degree do you feel, and how could that be measured? To what degree do you feel that the report's findings are representative of other NGOs? Of course, probably we can all relate to most of the findings, but do you think that there would be ownership in the sense of people, well, or other organizations, other NGOs would directly relate to this? And would they potentially find other, let's say, barriers as well? Or maybe there would be other inputs with regards to additional methods that they would see or that they might be using already to address the problems. Is there any potential work to expand the tools or the report in that way? Or this is basically, or maybe you already have some indication of how other NGOs have reacted to this. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, great question. So your first question about dissemination, that was very intentionally a very big part of this project. So as I was mentioning, we had these 4 dialogue events all in different continents, actually. So in Nairobi, Amman, Washington, D.C., and San Salvador. And those included, we tried to make those well balanced between both IRC and other organizations, trying to include very specifically local partners and the places where we were having the events. And also we had some travel from local partners from Iraq and the DRC, and then from all around in Latin America as well. Yeah, because we think it's essential not just to create this tool, but also to try to encourage uptake of the tool. And I think beyond that, I think just opening the sector and, the sector at wide, not just the IRC, but the entire kind of humanitarian sector to this conversation. We understand that not everyone's going to use these specific 7 tools, but we want to do everything we can to start getting people to think about how they can better empower their frontline staff and better, utilize this power that frontline staff have in engaging with communities. Yeah, and then we've also done a suite of presentations similar to this one, at various interagency kind of forums. So yeah, very intentionally working on disseminating this. Always open to other ideas or recommendations if you have anywhere that you think we could present this or share it. Yes, and then your second question about whether this is representative of other organizations. So that was also something that was very intentional to us throughout the development. We wanted this to be not IRC specific. We really tried to make it applicable to other organizations and to every context. So the entire project has been guided by a project advisory committee, which is mostly made up of non-IRC actors, including people from the Grand Bargain Revolution, from IASC, from IFRC, ICRC. Yeah, so we were really trying to, we tried to have this guidance to ensure that these findings would not be IRC specific, and they've really had a lot of input on what's in the toolkit, what's in the learning report as well. And then also when we developed the toolkit and when we piloted the toolkit, our local partners in Iraq and DRC were heavily involved. we wanted to make, because not only do we want to make sure it's not IRC specific, but we also want to make sure it's usable by local organizations and not just international organizations. So yeah, this has been very intentional, part of the development of the toolkit and every tool in it. Yeah, of course, there could be other tools that may be more relevant for other organizations, but we think we really work to create 7 tools that we think can be applicable to anyone. And also, like, we wanted specifically 7 tools that are very easy to integrate into already existing business processes. So business processes that we think are happening at every organization. So for example, the leadership self-assessment tool that Dastan talked about, I think most organizations, leadership at every level are having fairly regular meetings, internal meetings, and this tool can just be used within those meetings. In fact, that's how it's meant to be used. You know, every job in our organizations have a job description or a job posting or whatever you might call it. So this language that we created to be added to it, we made it as general as it could possibly be so that it can be applicable to any frontline staff job description at any organization. This is a process that we're all doing already, so we can just use this tool in that process. Yeah, so we really believe that this is already applicable to any organization in any context. Yeah, does that answer your question, or does anyone, do any of my colleagues have anything to add?
Are there any other questions from the group here? If not, I have another question as well. But please speak up if anyone else have any questions. My question is on impact, specifically on program change, because I think, again, for accountability reasons, there's no point in community engagement unless our findings and what we hear from the community is actually leading to program change. So I'm wondering, and Dastan was kind of alluding to some changes that had been made. If we're assuming that the frontline staff participation in, for example, program design is representing the a higher level participation, etc., from the community. Have you seen any changes based on this participation from the community via the frontline staff in program change, activity change? Yeah, any changes basically?
Dastan, I know this was a while ago, but do you want to, if you're able to remember in detail, do you want to talk about the proposal that you guys developed last year with the PRM proposal?
Yes, so actually I have a difficulty to remember the exact activity that has changed, but because I am sure that Leah also remember when we had that workshop in Amman, and also we invited our protection and rule of law team, and really they were not prepared for anything. They were just explaining the experience, and through them, like, because later we didn't have that much follow-up, like I knew like things change in our legal programming. So I think it was either about the again accessibility, but not the access to the locations. Usually it was about like our lawyers, they were in the, like, for example, they are in the court, or like they are in the government center. So sometimes there are clients that actually cannot access it because either they don't have money for the transportation, or like the other kind of the reasons. So I think what they came up is like the mobile team. So instead of the clients go to that location. There is a mobile team, you know, in the small town, yeah, not in the big city, like in the small town or rural areas, they go and check the documents or maybe get the documents and doing that things. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the things which has changed. So it's a very, like, sometimes a very programmatic, but like very effective for the community. So like there was kind of that small practical or small programmatic change. And for the proposal that Leah mentioned, it was like actually, like as I mentioned, we were implementing that project, but when we have the frontline staff actually reviewing or having a discussion in the proposal, which was like a very big we have implementation in three like a very big governorate in Iraq. So they were like actually participating in even the context analysis, and again of that kind of very technical things, which is like maybe as our eyes we cannot see it, because like we see it's a very effective that we provided the lawyer, we provided the resources, we provided that and that, but like sometimes we don't think about the other thing, but they know it, like they exactly know. So that's something I remember from the change. So usually, yeah, the change it's coming from the different style or like a different way, but again, yes, we could see the change.
Thank you. That's very good examples. Valentina, do you want to add something to that?
Hi, Christine. Can you just confirm that you can hear me well, because I'm joining from
Yes.
a like small corner.
We can hear
So
you.
just just maybe on the impact, I would say that indeed we did pilot it in two contexts with different stakeholders, but realistically this toolkit has been finalized in April this year. So talking about like long-term impact is a bit difficult at this point. However, our kind of like goal with the focus on the frontline staff was from the like realistic, practical perspective that when we talk about community engagement and who's actually doing meetings or design meetings with the community representatives, this is normally not maybe the program design leads. This is outsourced to the frontline staff, putting it closer to the community, speak the local language. They are tasked to do this job with the limited guidance oftentimes, and then their job is to report back to the maybe country office from the field office, and these results are expected to influence decision making when it comes to proposal design or adjustment and the implementation. Which we observed oftentimes is that even frontline staff is not invited in the room when the critical decision making is made. So if we don't engage our frontline staff, at least as a proxy, how can we say that we're actually meaningfully engaging community representatives who are representatives or even like broader community members, if even with our frontline staff who oftentimes come from the communities, speak the local language, represent local culture and preferences? How can we say we listen to the community themselves if we don't even engage our own frontline staff who was our full-time staff capacity, and they're not taking part in critical decisions where they have expertise to share, contextual expertise in addition to the technical expertise that are, in my perspective, are still mostly prioritized when it comes to humanitarian interventions.
And I'll just add, I have one more like specific story about this, which I think illustrates why we wanted to engage frontline staff. So one of our local partners, the Baghdad Women's Association in Iraq, they piloted the field visit form. And I think this is a really good example of a really good answer to your question. So when they used the field visit form, one of their leaders was meeting with frontline staff, and they learned they had been implementing a lot of what was it, like job preparement training, like training people on how to look for jobs or like specific skills that can help qualify them for jobs. This was like what they had been focused on for a long time. However, when this leader visited frontline staff in the field, the frontline staff told them like they were telling them feedback that they were aware of these, like what was being talked about in the community, but it hadn't really been reported in a formal way through formal feedback mechanisms. And the community had been telling the frontline staff about this, that they didn't really feel the need for this training anymore. What they needed at this point was like income generating activities. You know, they're getting all this training, but there's not really jobs to be found. And so this like really changed the BWA's programming. The leader went back to the other leaders at like one of their next meetings and told them this, and they were all totally unaware of this feedback. And it did affect their programming. I think they were able to pivot some of their funding to start trying to change what programming they were offering pretty quickly. And so, yeah, so I think this illustrates that like sometimes we can't, like those leaders maybe couldn't interact directly with the community. And even if they could, the community probably wouldn't feel comfortable sharing this feedback with them. Clearly, the community wasn't using formal feedback mechanisms to report it. And so this engagement with the frontline staff who know about this feedback but maybe don't realize that it's feedback that needs to be reported, this is how we can kind of address this gap that sometimes happens. So yeah, I think that frontline staff are an incredibly valuable like proxy for the community in a lot of situations.
Thanks very much for that example as well. Yeah, and this is a very good point that I want to emphasize to all the donors out there that might be listening in. We need flexible funding so that pivot can happen, so that we're able to make the program changes from the community via the frontline staff sometimes. So that could be a very good note to end on, unless there are any more comments or questions. Leah or Dastan or Valentina, do you want to add anything before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Leo shared a place where we can continue to disseminate the results. So my final plug would just be if anyone else has any sort of newsletter or forum where we can share these results or open up this conversation, we'd be really happy to do so. And I can write me and my colleague Valentina's emails in the chat so that you can contact us. And thank you so much for inviting me and Dastan to do this presentation. It's really nice to have one that's so open to discussion. It's a lot more interesting for us than talking for an hour. So thank you.
We were so happy that you could make it. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this resource. We'll probably be in touch again with more questions, but please do write your email addresses there so you can be bombarded with questions. Thanks, thanks, Leo, in the chat. I'm going to stop recording now. Thanks again, and if anyone has anything they want to raise with the forum through another community coffee and chat in the future, don't feel shy. Just please contact me. We're here as a forum, as a collective group of community engagement experts. So contact me about any topic you want discussed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your presentation.